Got some slides to share with you today. Let's just get them on the screen. This will be a good sort of 50,000-foot overview of the business. And I know this is geared to 2019, but we put this out at the end of the year. Trust me, just as relevant as today. I realize I don't have a clicker, so I'm not quite sure how this is going to work, but if we can move on to the next slide. This is a product of something new that is coming to Variety. You'll see in about a month or so, called Variety Intelligence Platform. It's a new extension of the business. This takes you far beyond the news to real thought leadership and analysis, digging deep on the subjects that matter most to the media business. And this is just a taste of that. I encourage you to go to the website at variety.com and check this out. Next slide, please. Let's set the stage for where the business is right now. When you think about the traditional, media companies, they are very clearly being outsized, outmatched by these gigantic tech companies that are basically eating the lunch of the traditional media companies, taking over and absorbing the advertising revenues, subscription revenues. This is not new. What is new, I think, is how the media companies are fighting back. Number one, as we clearly saw in 2019, M&A is in high gear. You saw some pretty major combinations of companies. I think it's slowing down a bit in 2020. I don't necessarily know that we're going to see the same amount of deals that we saw in 2019, but as you can see at the bottom of the chart, there's plenty of what John Malone calls free radicals that can be absorbed. I would look at MGM as probably the company that everyone is watching now. Who's going to scoop that up? So that's one way that the media companies are trying to close the gap with tech. The second is with streaming services. I'm sure you all know this. It's pretty much kind of the story for the next few years. The market that was set in place by Netflix and Amazon Prime, we are now seeing a second wave that we are some months into. Disney Plus, of course, hugely successful launch, very impressive. Apple has come in. I think we're going to have to play wait and see on that one. They've made some progress, but clearly not the success story that Disney Plus is. And I think what's also interesting in 2020 is we're going to see more of them come out from AT&T with HBO Max and Peacock from NBC Universal. But I think the game is changing a bit where it's not just about subscription dollars, it's also about advertising dollars. This is going to be the year where we're going to get a sense of where advertising and subscription revenues play out. Advertising obviously provides a lower barrier to entry. And so between this and M&A, this is really the heat of the tension between tech and media. And man, does media need to make up some ground. This is probably the scariest slide for those of the traditional companies. The acceleration of cord cutting is very real, probably not reversible, may not necessarily plummet at the rate that it did in 2019 and 2020, but there's no going back here. This, of course, is the biggest revenue stream in all of media. Forget about movies, forget about theme parks. This is far and away the foundation of the entertainment business. And there was a little side trend with regard to these virtual MVPD services like YouTube TV and Sling. That market is not going well. The prices of these products are skyrocketing. I don't know that you're going to see that category be the savior that it needed to be. And of course, TV ratings have been in free fall for quite some time. Another irreversible trend that when you look at the younger demos gets even worse over time. That is going to drag down advertising revenues as well, although I don't think you're going to see it quite plummet. If you look at the dollar figures right now, TV is actually holding up fairly well under the circumstances. That's because there's still big attractions in sports and the like. So advertising, I think, is going to lag the decline in TV ratings. And so another way we're also seeing this sort of tension play out between the tech and media companies is the bidding war over producing talent has been huge throughout 2019. It's extended into 2020. If you are a major A-list producer, there are multiple companies that want to pay you a 9-figure sum to produce exclusively for them in the next couple of years. I don't think we're done with this trend. I think there's still some producers that are sort of sitting on the sidelines waiting for their big deal. Another big bidding war has been for the classic TV shows of the past 10, 20 years that are fetching on average about $500 million for their libraries. The streaming services have seen that this is sort of foundational to what they do. You can certainly spend, as Netflix is doing, on originals in a big way, and I think right now it's about 40% of Netflix's content spend. But if you really want to come to play in this space, you've got to have a number of these shows in your arsenal, and some library sales that have gone on in recent years show how in demand they are. All in all, the content spend is tremendous. And this figure, actually, I would update, is probably now more at about 120 billion from our last math on the subject. But this is where the war is. Everyone is spending like crazy, which to some degree is good news for Hollywood on the production side, because there is a lot of buyers to go around, and it's just amazing how much is being spent. Notice, though, it's not like traditional media is a slacker, particularly when you combine sports content in there. Sports is really sort of the ballast for the traditional media business. It's what's bringing the value to paid TV, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, although I do think you'll see the tech companies try to bid away the bigger league rights in the coming years. And of course, if you're in this town, you've seen a whole other side battle play out over the Writers Guild and talent agencies. This one's going to be settled in the courts perhaps later in 2020, but this has dragged on and been a pretty big distraction. The truth is this is really just a prelude to an even bigger conflict that we will see this year between the guilds and the conglomerates over master contracts. If that doesn't go well, you could see yet another strike cripple this town as early as the spring. So this is something to keep an eye on. And it's not as if the tech companies have no problems at all. Clearly, the prospect of regulation is weighing heavily. You saw some news yesterday with regard to the DOJ scrutinizing Alphabet, Google, and advertising tools. That said, it really hasn't put a crimp much in the advertising revenues that the biggest tech companies are pocketing. So they really have yet to feel the sting of regulation, and I think you're seeing that the financials for these tech companies really haven't been hurt much, but that could change in time. And the tech companies, it's not as if there's no new competition. I'd say the big success story of 2019 was TikTok. If you have kids in the room, you know of what I speak. They're not on Instagram or Snap in the same way they were in previous years. And so even in this space with some pretty massive competitors, new ones are coming in as well. And in the tech space as well, it's not as if the digital native publishers there are doing nearly as well as the platforms on which they depend for revenue. This has been a struggle now for a few years. There's simply not enough revenue to go around. You think of the lion's share that goes to these platforms. And so there's been some consolidation in this space, and I think we're going to continue to see that as well. Back on the film side, it's interesting that it's almost as if there's Disney and then there's everybody else. 2019 was hugely successful for Disney on the film side, less so for everyone else. That said, I think 2020, while Disney will remain dominant, I think 2019 was clearly the peak. This will be interesting to follow as the year goes by. And, we've got the Oscars coming up later this weekend. Theatrical, we're just beginning to see that the forces that the streaming services unleashed on the TV business, I think, are going to play out in film as well. We've already seen this in terms of the theatrical window for a lot of the top films that are going to be contending on Sunday. This is a trend that I think is just beginning. Over in music, I think it's been an interesting time because think back to like 10 plus years the damage Napster and such have done. I think the music business certainly is not out of the woods, but has recovered a lot, thanks a lot to the growth of Spotify. It's incredible competition, though, when you think of what Apple, Amazon, YouTube are going to be in this space. And so this is something that will be an interesting competition that will play out later this year. Podcasts continue to also be a nice growth area. You saw just yesterday YouTube announcing they had purchased The Ringer. They had already purchased some other big companies. So it's not just about music on these streaming platforms. Podcasts are also driving growth. And the smart speaker business over in the hardware world, I think, is going to be the beneficiary of the growth in audio. Lots of different players in this space, but it is interesting to see this whole new product category that is just beginning to get traction. And gaming, I talked about TikTok, but Fortnite also is just a major, major sensation among younger demos worldwide. I think the growth is probably going to taper off to some degree, but Fortnite is really just the beginning of how big this category is. And lastly, for the top 19 trend in 2019, connected TV. Clearly, the products, whether they are smart TVs embedded or products like Roku that connect to the streaming world, they are really riding the growth, particularly in advertising. And it's going to be interesting to see that growth continue. I think there is no better segue to our next panel. But again, if you want to learn more about this kind of stuff, Variety Intelligence Platform is going to be launching in just a month or so, and I encourage you all to check it out. Thanks.